we've just been doing the topic salinity, and we've explored a whole lot of stuff in relationship to salinity. But one of our main things is we've been making an instrument and trying to talk about precision and system error. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about the world of science from that aspect for you?
Well, Steve, I'm Linda, and I'm a laboratory and instrument technician at the Portobello Marine Laboratory.
Okay. And you mentioned nanotechnology. Now, surely the level of precision there and minimisation of error there is vitally important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was working in research and development, Steve, so I was working on building an instrument for measuring nanoparticles. So the particles that are about the size of a thousandth of a width of a human hair, so very, very small. So you're needing to think about things in a whole different scale, and how we were using electrical impulses as the scale from which we were measuring against. So reducing error for nanotechnology was about working systematically.
Right. Now, I think previously you were talking to me about it. You have an example of setting a standard and calibration from your work in the Marine Lab. Can you share that with us? Okay,
well, we're talking about salinity, and we're measuring salinity. You need to measure against a known quantity. Okay, and how do you sort of measure against a known quantity? I mean, you've got this instrument. Some of these instruments are fairly fancy, quite sophisticated. You look at them and you think, wow, that's amazing. But all instruments must be calibrated against a known quantity. It doesn't matter whether it's a $100,000 instrument or a $100 instrument. You always have to calibrate against a known quantity.
Or if it's a plastic straw hydrometer you've made at home.
Yeah, so what's your known quantity for in your plastic straw hydrometer?
Well, we tried to go for pure tap water as 0.
So when in the science lab, what we would use is we would make up a salinity standard. So standards tend to be made up at 20 degrees centigrade, because of course you have a certain amount of thermal expansion in water. So right. If you're making...
Oh, just hold it there, Linda. That's a connection to our next topic, temperature. So that was a lovely little piece of a connection there that we'll pick up on later on. But carry on, yeah.
So if I'm making up a salinity standard, let's say 35 parts per trillion or something like that, and you want to make up that standard to a known quantity, how do you know that your volume is exact? And what I have here, something I prepared earlier, is it's called a volumetric flask, and it's actually a calibrated glass vessel. So I'll show you one.
Yes, yep.
Can you see this? And if you look, can you see on the neck that line? So that line is specific to this measuring flask, and that will be exactly 2 litres at 20 degrees centigrade when you're filled it up with a meniscus to this line. Right. The questions that I ask myself every day, and a former colleague of mine always said, cast your calibrated eyeball over the numbers. And I always remember it for being quite quirky, but actually very accurate. Look at the numbers that are coming out. Do they make sense?
So if they don't, reason, is that right? Is it reasonable?
Yeah, so do they make sense? And if they don't, why don't they make sense? And you need to sort of come up with a sensible reason why they don't make sense. You know, have you used the instrument correctly, or have you what is your standard made up wrong? I've made up standards incorrectly in the past, and I can tell from the numbers that are coming out when I make perhaps a standard curve that the standards are wrong. So I have to start again, because the science that you're building on this calibration, this is the fundamental cornerstone of everything else you do.
Hey, thanks very much, Linda. We have with us now Jess, who's going to tell us a little bit about the world of marine science and how she deals and have to deal with this topic of salinity. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Steve. So, yeah, I'm Jess, and I'm a PhD student in microbiology and marine science. I'm also do a bit of teaching at the Marine Study Centre as well. So part of my work is looking at the role of subtropical fronts. So this is an area where different water masses in the oceans merge, and how this area in the ocean shapes microbial communities. So they're really tiny microbes and bacteria and viruses that are just super abundant throughout the entire ocean.
Right. So subtropical, does this mean it's warmer?
No, it doesn't, not necessarily. So the subtropical region spans from below the tropics down to about where the latitude where we are in Dunedin, so about 45 degrees. And then below there is the subantarctic. So the subtropical water is still pretty cold.
Diving, this is where we're heading. And Jess, I understand you actually get employed and paid good money to go diving.
Yep, so alongside my studies, I've also been working as a diver. And so I've done some dive instructing, but also some scientific diving. So scientific divers do lots of different jobs in lots of different places. And one of the places that I've worked in is Fiordland. So we get to do some pretty cool dives over there in the south, so in the west coast of the South Island.
And this is a particularly interesting place to be diving in terms of salinity and buoyancy. Is that right, Jess?
Yeah, it is. So Fiordland gets a really extreme amount of rain, so up to 8 metres in a year. This fresh water, it ends up coming down through the forest and entering the marine environment, and it really changes the marine environment. So what happens is we get all this rain coming down, and we end up with a layer of water. We call this the low salinity layer, and that sits on top of the regular oceanic water.
Because it's less dense?
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
Fresh water is less dense, so it floats and sits on top of the more dense ocean water.
Yeah.
So in some areas, this layer can be up to 10 metres deep, but typically it's about 2 to 3 metres.
What's tricky about diving in this condition?
So buoyancy control is really important for divers. So in order for us to sink down underwater, our bodies and the equipment that we wear needs to be denser than the surrounding water. So one of the ways that we achieve this is by wearing a weight belt.
Yeah. Oh.
So these have lead weights on them. So they add a lot of weight in quite a small volume. So therefore that increases our density.
Mm-hmm.
But because this upper layer is less salty, it's less dense. So it's actually easier for divers to sink below the surface in less saline water compared to regular seawater.
So you sink down that reasonably quickly?
Yep. So you'd want to wear a little bit less weight so that you can control your descent in less saline water. But then when we enter this saltier oceanic water below, that water provides us with more buoyancy. But then another thing that happens when we go deeper down underwater, the air spaces in our body, such as in our lungs and the space that we have inside our mask, those air spaces compress, which then increases our density. So it's kind of a bit of a juggling act. There's like a wee calculation that you can work out to estimate the amount of weight that you need, depending on your body weight, how thick the wetsuit is that you wear. So because this water is quite cold, we need to wear a wetsuit, a nice thick wetsuit that's made of neoprene, which keeps us afloat. So if we have a thick wetsuit on, we add a certain amount of weight, and then So it's a rough calculation, and then so you base off that, and then it's all on you to basically go out there, give it a go, see what works for you and your body, and yeah, get comfortable.
A bit of experience helps.
Yeah, definitely a bit of experience helps. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty exciting, Jess. Thanks very much for sharing that with us, and all the success to you on your next dive.
Kia ora, Steve. Thank you for having me. You are correct. I'm a recent graduate of marine science, and for my master's project, I studied the sperm whale population up in Kaikoura.
Those are sperm whales behind you there.
Yes, so I've got a couple of our sperm whale buddies from Kaikoura just chilling in the back here. This photo was taken while I was in the field. This is Kaikoura, and it's quite rare to have two sperm whales like this together at the surface, because in Kaikoura we only get male sperm whales visiting, and they're typically, when they're in an area with other males, they don't socialize in the same way that other marine mammals, other cetaceans socialize. They like to kind of be a bit more solo, and they kind of just do their own thing, catch some squid, do some feeding, but every so often we do see them side by side surfacing together, which is really interesting.
Right. Now, the nature of the ocean, the nature of seawater is such that sound is quite an important part of the marine world. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that's really special about sperm whales is that they dive really deep. So they will dive over 1,000 meters in the deep water canyon systems around the world, and they have to be able to find their food in these deep waters. And light doesn't go through the water as well at those depths. So after about 100 meters down in the water, light doesn't really reach anymore. So you can imagine that deeper than 1,000 meters is super dark. There's no light there. So
just a minute there. That's interesting, Tamlin, because on topic number 3, we're going to go into light in some detail. So you're saying just a little wee thin layer at the top has got light in it, and the rest of the ocean world is just dark and black.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yep, you're totally right.
Carry on.
So if you're living in this dark environment where you can't use your eyes to find your food, then you've got to find another way to find food, to navigate, and that's where sound comes in. And sperm whales are a great example of this, because they track their food using sound.
But like in land, like if we're in the bush or the forest or on a mountain, there's a limit to how far sound travels, and there's a limit to how accurate and precise we can be with sound. How is it that sound works so well in the marine environment?
Water is denser than air, and sound can travel better through water. And then when you've got the ocean where there's salt in the water is even denser again, and sound can travel even further. Right. So you've got situations where, you know, you might have a similar strength of sound in the water, and it will be able to travel further in seawater.
I understand also it travels faster, so you get the information sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So
right, 5 times as far, 5 times as fast as it does in air, roughly.
Yep, absolutely, roughly about that.
Right. What's that? I think that's 1,500 meters a second or something.
Yeah.
Really fast. Yeah.
Really fast, and so you can see how it really unlocks a whole new way of finding out information about your world and your surroundings if you're able to use sound to that extent.
So if whales were scientists, they'd be very good at being sound scientists. In fact, they'd be very sound scientists.
Exactly.
So how do you go about studying sound, and how do you do this?
Yeah, so when we're studying the sperm whale population in Kaikoura, and this is, lab groups around the world use sound a lot for tracking sperm whales, because they're making these regular clicking sounds while they're trying to track their prey. So when we're in Kaikoura, we have a special underwater microphone called a hydrophone. We stick this in the water, we have some headphones that are attached to it, and then we can receive sound from underneath the water, and we can tell when a sperm whale's around because they've got a very distinctive click. And I will play one of those sounds now so that you can hear what we hear when we're listening.
I heard a click, click, click.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that click, click, click sound, those are the...
Was that buzzy sound at the end part of it too?
Yeah, and that buzzy sound is part of it too. So those standard clicks that you're hearing are what they're using when they're foraging and trying to find squid. And then they also make these buzzing sounds, and we usually hear that near the end of a dive. So there's theories around that where it may be a more a sound that helps them specify more clearly where the location is, because they're doing the clicks more rapidly. Right.
Finer detail.
Yeah.
Can you? I think you've got a picture of yourself doing this work. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got your headphones on. You're holding the pole with the hydrophone. You're in your boat.
Yep. That's me right there.
Yeah.
So I'll show you a picture here of the end of the hydrophone. So this is the bit that's going in the water and receiving the sound. This foam cone is really important because it helps the hydrophone be directional. So we only receive sound coming in the front here, and the microphone's located inside in this bit here. And then it stops sound from around the sides coming in. So as we turn the hydrophone, so I'd be turning it, we can hear where the loudest sound is, and the direction that the loudest sound is coming from is where our sperm whale is. Top predators like sperm whales are really good indicators of the health of an ecosystem. You know, if sperm whales are there and they're feeding, then that can indicate to us that, yep, there's food there available for them. If they're not there, then maybe something's happening to that environment. So yeah, really you can get a lot of information from one population.
Oh, thanks very much, Tamlin. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about working in the marine environment with sound and sperm whales?
I think it's just you really, when you're listening to sperm whale clicks and you're getting like a tiny sliver of insight into what a world must seem like for them. You know, you're using your ears. Often we'd be on the boat and would close our eyes so that we can really focus on the sound. And it's a whole different way of working than I've been exposed to before, having to track an animal that way and really get in touch with a different sense, I guess. You know, we don't use sound as much as a sperm whale does. So a really interesting experience.
So you get a little bit of a sense about being a large, unusual creature living immersed in this
exactly
ocean mass, you know, this huge dark expanse that is your home.
Yeah, it's your home. And you know, a male sperm whale will dive for 40 minutes and then be on the surface for maybe 10 minutes resting, and then he'll dive again. So most of his life he's spending, especially when he's at Kaikoura, is spending under the water. So the question for the whale isn't, is there an ocean in the house? So the ocean is their house. Fascinating, us being mammals as well, you know, to have so many similarities to a sperm whale, but to have adapted to such a completely different environment and how well they've adapted to that. So yeah, very fascinating.
Thanks very much, Tamlin.